this drug is, I mean, psilocybin or
Yes.
magic mushrooms is alongside crystal meth in our categorization of drugs, which seems,
Yes.
I mean, I've never tried to self-medicate with crystal meth, but it doesn't seem like the best idea.
No, it's not a treatment for depression.
What's
you're right.
happened? what's happened to the? Is this a bureaucracy problem, or is it about, as you say, vilification, a moral failing?
Well, it's even worse than, it's more than moral, it's political. At one level, psychedelics are more dangerous than crystal meth, because crystal meth kills poor people, often black people. In America, they don't vote. Whereas psychedelics change the minds of white people in America that do vote. And the reason psychedelics were banned in 1967 in the US, in 1970 in the UK, and 1971 by the UN conventions, was simply because psychedelics were allowing people to think differently about how they wanted, particularly the US, to run international relations. The war in Vietnam was being protested. There's this amazing photograph I have with someone holding a placard. It says, "Drop acid, not bombs." And that was seen as such a threat to the US way of dealing with international relations. Because at that point, I don't think the protester knew, they were doing an awful lot of bombing in Laos and Cambodia. That was a threat. Now, they couldn't ban the anti-war protests, so they banned the drugs instead, thinking that would dissipate the protests. Of course, it didn't, and eventually the protesters won. The Vietnam War ended, but by that time the drugs had been banned. And one of the worst things about drug laws internationally is that it's almost impossible to remedy them. I mean, for example, most of you know now that in America, 2/3 of states have medical cannabis, and half of states have recreational cannabis. But it's still illegal under the federal law. In fact, there's only two countries in the world that have actually made cannabis have breached or pulled cannabis out of the UN conventions, and that's Canada and Uruguay. Every other country in the world, even America, still complies with the UN regulations, which still says that cannabis is an illegal drug. And no country has pulled psychedelics out of the UN conventions. So everything we do in the face of this enormous barrier, which says these drugs are very dangerous, they're Schedule I drugs. I have to have a special safe. To do this research, I had to have a special safe bolted to the floor of my office. And I said to them, well, why can't I put psilocybin alongside the heroin and cocaine, which I have in the hospital pharmacy? And they say, you can't do that because it's a Schedule I drug. And I say, yeah, but if anyone breaks in, they're going to take the heroin and cocaine. They're not going to take the psilocybin. But it's a Schedule I drug. You have to have they've created this myth that these are very dangerous, in many ways to justify the fact that they're illegal at all. Because almost everything you've heard about psychedelics has actually been a deliberate misrepresentation in order to perpetuate this political decision that people shouldn't use them. We are quite top-down, quite a paternalistic, quite an autocratic society in the health. There is very little scope to do anything that we're not told to do from above. And of course, that's why I was sacked, because even if you challenge without doing anything other than make an intellectual question about the policy, they don't like it.
Well, to return to what you were saying before as well, you are effectively advocating for greater availability of drugs that might break people out of a, let's say, slavish model of behaviour that might actually crack, as they were so scared about it doing during the period of Vietnam, crack people out of being servile towards this kind of authoritarian bent.
Well, it probably doesn't come as a surprise to you that I'm actually quite a fan of Huxley. You probably gathered that by now. So, but my favourite book, it's not it's definitely not Brave New World, and it's definitely not Doors of Perception. It's Island, his last book. He wrote it before he died. And in that book, he tried to envisage, and in fact it's like a roadmap to a society where you use psychology, and he was very knowledgeable about psychology. You use dance, you use movement, you use exercise, and you use psychedelics to maximize the quality of life in society. That's what we should be doing. I said that, I was on the Good Read program about 6 years ago, and Ireland was my good read. And 2 weeks later, I was in Parliament at a parliamentary group on drugs and drug addiction. And I was viciously attacked by a drug service provider for daring to talk on the radio about the use of illegal drugs to help people have a better life. And that kind of exemplifies the way we've got silos of thinking which have been entrenched for decades. And I'm not even sure psychedelics could change their minds and open their minds.
Too stuck in the Victorian complex.
In the Puritanism.
Puritanical impulse. So let's go from the Puritans, I suppose, to the mystical, because that's the part of this that we haven't mentioned, which is that for most people, their understanding of psychedelics is that slightly annoying businessman friend they have who went on an away day to take some ayahuasca in South America and came back even more annoying than they were when they left. So we know that people have a kind of desire to engage with the more ancient spiritual elements of this, the drumming circles and the ritualistic parts of the experience, which are taken away in the kind of clinical setting. I assume you're not sitting there with a kind of pair of bongos or whatever when they're doing the process.
Well, you wouldn't stop them, but they usually don't ask for them.
Ask and you shall receive. Okay, so I suppose the question here is taking away that mystical element from the process and making it a clinical process, of course, legitimizes it in one way because it allows more uptight medical professionals to say, look, we're in a white room and you're lying on a sofa. But maybe it also robs it of something that's very important about it, which is that connection with its cultural roots.
I think you're sort of half right. I mean, I think if we were using ayahuasca, it would be more effective if we were somewhere in the Amazon basin in a group at night, using a ritual drink. I think it's important to realise that LSD actually is a synthetic compound. It doesn't come from plants. And it tends to have been used in more medical settings. But we make concessions. We understand that the psychological experience is going to be greater if you are in a room which is nice and pleasant, and so we have wall hangings and we have music. We think music is particularly important in helping people get to the emotional state where they can do the best effects.
Do you let them choose their music, or do you guide them with that?
So we started off. This is one of the problems of doing science. If you let your volunteers choose anything, the referees say, "Oh, it's rubbish," because how did you control for the music? So in the first studies, we've always used the same soundtrack, which is a strength scientifically, but a weakness in therapeutically. And so now we're moving much more towards allowing people to have a say in the music, because some people didn't actually like some bits of the music we gave them, and not unsurprisingly, frankly. I mean, one of the pieces we use is Gorecki's Third Symphony, which some of you'll all have heard of it, but you might not actually, if you know the subtext of it, it's very, very moving, but very quite challenging. So we want people to have experiences which are safe and powerful and emotional, and we have therapists with them, and we have subdued lighting and music, etc. And normally they have eye shades so that they can essentially get deeper into the hallucinations and the other experiences. And many of them do have mystical experiences. They would probably have bigger mystical experiences if they went and did it with a shaman somewhere. But they do have powerful experiences. And we're not entirely sure yet whether we think the power of the experience is probably the key thing, whether it's mystical or whether it's spiritual or whether it's just really powerful. That probably doesn't matter. So it's more the magnitude rather than the content that helps people get better.
Do you think we might hit a time where the scientific community are open-minded enough that you would have those two things combined, that you could go to a clinic, on Harley Street and sit with a shaman in a room? You
could never afford that. Well, maybe some of you could, but most people. It's a great question. I mean, I'm open-minded about it. I think one of the great things about working in this field is it isn't just science, as you're intimating, it's not. But with most of the drive for the use of psychedelics in therapy is actually not coming from people like me. There's only two groups in Britain that are doing this research, because clearly the government's not funding it. Who else? But it's people who want help, who are seeking it out. And the veterans community in Britain, is large, particularly from the Iraq War and some from Afghanistan. And many of them are chronically traumatized, and they're seeking help with their trauma. And what they're telling me is that they're seeking either ayahuasca experiences in Spain or Latin America, or their mushroom experiences in the Netherlands, where you've got retreats. And they're doing it as a group. They're doing it with other veterans. And I kind of like that. I like that because one of the things about the military is you tend to get damaged as a group. You're out as a platoon, you get blown up, 2 of your mates die, 2 lose their legs, you get concussed. You come back, you've got the memories of it hanging with you all the time. And healing as a group may be more powerful for people who've been harmed as a group. So I'm very open-minded to the idea that for some people, group therapy is going to be more powerful than individual therapy. But then again, we have people who say, I don't want to go in a group. I really feel terrified. I've been traumatized by other people. So I think we have to give people the choice. But I am, quite sympathetic to the idea of group therapy. And I don't mind if you call me a shaman or not. I don't really mind.
Do you think that what people are actually finding when they have these transcendent experiences on psychedelics is something that we seem to have all lost, or at least the vast majority of people lost? In this country, it's barely 3% of the country who goes to church anymore. Is a kind of connection to the spiritual. Do you think there is something to that basic reconnection?
Yeah, have no doubt. I mean, what's interesting about psychedelics is they do improve connection. So we do studies in sort of healthy volunteers who aren't mentally ill, and we do studies in people who have mental illnesses. And we find in both groups, psychedelics increase connectedness. They increase connectedness with the self, with other people, and with nature. And that's an extremely reliable experience or finding. And I'm sure that's one of the things that people describe as being the most rewarding outcome from their experience. And whether churches give you that or not, I'm not entirely sure. I think quite a lot of churches actually do the opposite. They focus you in to the group. So you might be more connected with the congregation, but I'm not sure you become more connected with the world and the universe. But, if it works, it works. We can't prescribe. I don't think anyone's doing social prescribing of religion yet. But
I mean, maybe this is the post-Nuttian future that we need to look forward to.
But there's a very interesting relationship between psychedelics and religion, because pretty much all religions emerged from groups of people using psychedelics. And
this is like the Christian mysticism stuff that was...
Well, that's Amanita muscaris, and then the Hinduism came from a combination of mushrooms and ephedra, and of course the South American beliefs came from ayahuasca and DMT, and also from mushrooms. But there's a wonderful study going on in the States now using psilocybin in priests who've lost their faith. And it's working. Well, it's working for some faiths. I think it's quite as good for Islam as it is for Christianity, but there are priests who are coming out of that saying they have begun to find their faith again. And of course, there was this most remarkable experiment. It was called the Marsh Chapel, the miracle of Marsh Chapel, the Marsh Chapel experiment, which was conducted in Harvard in the 60s, when they took trainee priests, and it was a proper study. It was a randomized study. They took trainee priests on Good Friday. They were going to be in the chapel praying and contemplating for the whole day, and they split them up, and they gave 10 of them psilocybin, the same doses we use, 25 milligrams, and 10 of them placebo. And of the 10 given psilocybin, 8 of them had a powerful mystical experience where they saw God. So that does help make sense of the way religion or religious beliefs can be facilitated by changing the way your mind works. Now, of course, historically, people have done it in very different ways. I mean, in the old days, you used to starve yourself for quite a few days and nights, or kneel and pray for hours and hours, to get those kind of mystical changes, and they would have been produced by alterations in biochemistry due to stress, which are not necessarily very different from those that psychedelics produce, but psychedelics are just easier and probably more effective.